The city is covered in snow. A huge Christmas tree stands in the central square, surrounded by a festive crowd. Jin is among them. He's far removed from the holiday bustle, but today he wanted to see happy people. The serious faces of his subordinates had long since become boring to him. He approaches the tree. The lights captivate him, a grown man. He stands there for several minutes, simply gazing at the iridescent colors. His gaze falls on a girl standing to the side. She's alone and crying. Jin gets close enough to hear her words. The girl looks up at the top of the spruce tree and speaks to Father Frost. She explains that she wanted to come with her mother, but her mother has been unconscious in the hospital for a week. The girl admits that she's afraid to visit her mother because she can't bear to look at her. She asks for help. Jin listens to the end. As the girl leaves, wiping away tears, he quickly makes a decision. He'll follow her to find out where she lives and which hospital her mother is in. The girl goes into a bakery and buys some baked goods. Then she calls her grandmother and tells her she's going home. The genie expects her to go to the hospital, but that doesn't happen. He only learns her address and that she lives with her grandmother. The idea of helping this family so captivates Jean that he forgets about other matters. He returns to his office and gives his assistants the task of tapping into the grandmother's phone calls to find out about her daughter's condition. By evening, he has all the information. He finds out the hospital's address and realizes the family can't afford treatment. They're going into debt. Jin finally decides to solve all the problems in this family's life. He sits down in a chair and considers the first steps. He needs to arrange payment for the treatment and do it anonymously. His people are already ready to carry out the task. Jin looks out the window at the evening city. He doesn't yet know how exactly he'll help, but he's confident in his decision. The image of the crying girl won't leave his mind. He gives his first instructions to his assistants. They nod and leave the office. The work begins. Jin continues to ponder the details, but no longer doubts the correctness of his choice. Morning had arrived. The early winter dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in cool tones when Jean's black car pulled up at the main entrance of City Hospital No. 3. He stepped out, his dark coat a stark contrast to the white snow covering the hospital courtyard. He entered the building, his steps quick and determined. The hallway smelled of hand sanitizer and freshly washed floors. Jean walked to the administrative department, where the head doctor, a woman of about 50 in a white coat, with intelligent, tired eyes, was already waiting. They entered the office, and the door closed. "I'd like to pay for Yvonne's treatment in full," Jean began without preamble. He pulled out a black credit card and placed it on the table. "And for all the patients in your department, consider it a New Year's gift." The head doctor looked at him in amazement. "But the amount is very significant," she began. "That doesn't matter," Jean interrupted. "There's one condition. You tell the patients' families that you've found an anonymous sponsor. No mention of me." He swiped his card through the terminal when the portable device was brought to him. The numbers on the screen were truly impressive, but his face remained impassive. To him, they were just numbers, money he could easily spend on things far less significant. "Also transfer the money they've already paid to the family's account," Jin added, returning the card to his inside pocket. "Let it be a complete assistance package." The head doctor still couldn't get over it. "They won't believe it. It's unbelievable. Just do as I say." His voice was soft, but there was a hint of steel in it. He turned toward the exit. "Inform them within the hour." Exactly 30 minutes later, as agreed, the phone in Alma's apartment rang. The elderly woman, hearing the familiar voice of the head doctor, initially thought it was a prank. She sat on the edge of her kitchen chair, clutching the receiver tightly, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Free?" she asked, her voice trembling. "And you're giving us back the money we've already paid?" Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of relief. She repeated "thank you" over and over again, even though the doctor had explained that she should thank an anonymous donor. After the conversation, Alma sat motionless for a long time, then walked to the window and looked out at the snow falling outside. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders straightened, and the constant line of worry between her brows disappeared. Meanwhile, Corey, awakened by the conversation, stood in the kitchen doorway. Seeing her grandmother's tears, she was initially frightened, But then Alma smiled through her tears and shared the incredible news. The girl listened, her eyes wide, her heart filling with joy. "It's Father Frost," she whispered. "Grandma, it was he who helped." She practically ran through the snowy streets toward the main square, her lungs filling with cold air, her cheeks burning with cold and excitement. She didn't notice the two men in dark clothes who followed her closely at a respectful distance. They were Jin's men, carrying out his orders to escort the girl and report on her every move. In the square, Corey ran up to the enormous Christmas tree, her eyes shining. She stopped in the same spot where she had stood yesterday and looked up at the sparkling star at the top. "Thank you!" Her voice rang with happiness. "You really exist. Mom's treatment is now free, and Grandma got her money back. We'll be able to pay off our debts. We'll have enough for food and heating." She spoke loudly. "Gee!" Oblivious to the passers-by, who turned with smiles at the little girl talking to the tree. Tears streamed down her face, but now they were tears of joy, mixed with relief. "I really believe in you now," Corey continued, wiping her face with her glove. And I have one more request." Her voice became quieter, more serious. "Please make Mom wake up. Make her come to her senses. I really want to see her, but I'm still afraid to look at her when she's so still and pale." She paused, as if listening to the silence, then nodded decisively, as if she'd received an answer. Her childish faith was absolute. Turning, she ran to the same bakery where she'd been yesterday to buy herself a pie, as if in gratitude for her wish being granted. At this time, one of the men accompanying her quietly spoke into a microphone hidden in his collar. The girl made a new wish. She asks for her mother to regain consciousness. She says she's afraid to look at her in this state. On the other end of the line, in his office, Gene listened to this report. His usually impassive face turned serious. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers twitching. It was no longer just a question of money. It was about a person's health, about medical prognoses that even he couldn't directly influence. The task had become more complex, and he understood it. The image of the crying girl appeared again before his mind's eye, the way he had seen her for the first time. Her sincere grief, her helplessness, her tears, and now, her face beaming with happiness, her absolute faith in a miracle. He remembered being a child, believing in fairy tales, and looking forward to New Year's miracles. These memories had long been buried under the weight of years and the harsh realities of life, but now they were returning with unexpected force. "Okay," he said quietly in response, although he knew no one could hear him. "I'll do it." His decision was final. He would help this girl see her mother smiling and healthy again, no matter the cost. He would find the best doctors, bring the necessary equipment, do everything humanly possible. And even more. Jin walked to the window and looked out at the winter city. Somewhere out there was a little girl who believed in Santa Claus, and somewhere out there was her mother, fighting for her life. And now he, the Mafia boss, had become the link between them, the one who had to turn the fairy tale into reality. He returned to his desk and dialed his assistant. It was time to act. He urgently needed to find the best neurologists, learn about new treatments, and arrange consultations. Money didn't matter again, only results. There was unwavering determination in his voice as he gave orders. He wasn't just playing the role of a benefactor. He genuinely wanted to help, to restore the mother's child and the child's faith in miracles. And for this, he was ready to do anything. A black car stopped abruptly at the hospital's main entrance. Jin stepped out, his face tense, his movements sharp and precise. He walked down the familiar corridor, ignoring the medical staff, and entered the head doctor's office without knocking. The door slammed shut, and the doctor looked up from his papers with a start. He turned pale when he saw Jean. "You have 2 days," Jin began without preamble. His voice was quiet, but every word fell like a stone. "The woman must come to her senses. I accept no other options." The head doctor nervously ran a hand over his face. "Prepare everything necessary for its use." He turned and walked out, leaving the doctor in a state close to shock. Jin didn't return to the office. He remained at the hospital, settling into a private room that his team had quickly prepared for work. From there, he coordinated the drug delivery operation, His assistants worked all over the world. The first call came from a European country, home to the main laboratory producing the required drug. The negotiations were brief. Jean's name opened many doors, but even this was of no avail. The drug was so rare that samples were kept in special conditions and were not intended for sale. The second call was to another foreign clinic that had permission to experimentally use the necessary drug. The answer was the same: impossible. The third call gave hope. One of the researchers agreed to provide a sample for a sum that would have taken any sane person's breath away. Jean didn't even specify the figure, simply nodded to his financial assistant. But the main problem was delivery. The drug required special transportation conditions, and regular flights weren't suitable. So Jean ordered his private jet to be scrambled. 4 hours after the operation began, the plane carrying the drug took off. Jean didn't sleep a wink while the plane was in flight. He sat in the hospital room, studying the medical reports on Yvonne's condition. His people brought him everything they could find about the drug, the possible side effects, and the cases of its use. The doctor came in several times, trying to explain the risks. Even if the drug works, the consequences could be unpredictable. Jin listened silently, his face stony. He understood the risks, but he also understood that without this chance, the woman had little hope. Exactly 11 hours and 37 minutes after the surgery began, his phone vibrated. The plane had landed. 23 minutes later, a courier in a black suit entered the room and handed Jean a small temperature-controlled container. Jin didn't open it. He walked into the head doctor's office and placed the container on the table. "You have 24 hours, he said. "In 24 hours, I want to see a conscious woman." The doctor took the container with trembling hands. "We'll do everything we can." "No," Jean replied coldly. "You will do the impossible." While doctors prepared to administer the drug, Jean remained in the hospital. He sat in the same room, watching the monitors displaying Yvonne's results. His face remained impassive, but his fingers occasionally clenched into fists. The procedure took several hours. Nurses came in and out of Yvonne's room, and doctors constantly checked her vitals. Jean remained observant, though he wasn't entirely clear on the medical details. 6 hours after the drug administration, the first changes occurred. The monitor readings gradually improved. The head physician personally came to Jin with a report. "There is progress, but it's too early to talk about results." "Keep watching," Jean interrupted. 3 hours later, Yvonne's condition had stabilized enough that doctors allowed her to reduce the dosage of maintenance medications. And just 15 hours after the experimental drug was administered, something happened that they had almost ceased to believe. Yvonne opened her eyes. The news reached Jin instantly. He approached the room but didn't enter, watching through the glass wall. The woman was slowly coming to, her eyes struggling to focus on her surroundings. The doctors were stunned. They couldn't believe the speed and effectiveness of the treatment. The head doctor approached Jin again, this time with an apologetic expression. "This is incredible. In all my years of practice, I've never seen anything like it." Jin nodded, his face finally relaxing. "How many days until she can be discharged?" "Usually an injury like this requires a long rehabilitation period, but given the circumstances, we can discharge her the day after tomorrow." She was informed that she was being discharged, that her treatment was complete. The woman didn't ask who paid for the treatment. She was too weak and confused. The only thing she could think about was her daughter and mother, whom she hadn't seen for so long. On the day of her discharge, the hospital car came to pick Yvonne up. She was carefully placed in the back seat, wrapped in a warm blanket. The drive home passed in a blur. She looked out the window at the familiar streets, the snow-covered houses, and couldn't believe she was returning. At this time, the house was ablaze with activity. Alma and Corey had received a call from the hospital that morning and had been restless ever since. Grandma was bustling about the house, trying to get it perfectly tidy, even though her hands were shaking with excitement. Corey was running from window to window, checking every 5 minutes for a car. When the car finally pulled up in front of their house, Corey froze by the window, hesitating to approach the door. Alma, on the other hand, rushed to open it, her face streaked with tears. Yvonne slowly stepped out of the car, leaning on the driver's arm. She looked up, saw her mother in the doorway, and her daughter at the window, and smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a weak, hesitant smile, but it was exactly what both the elderly woman in the doorway and the girl by the window had been waiting for. In that moment, all fears, all worries, were left behind. They were together again, all three of them. The cozy kitchen smells of freshly brewed tea and homemade cookies. 3 generations of women sit at the table. Yvonne, still pale but radiant with happiness. Alma, unable to hold back tears of relief. And Corey, whose face expresses unshakable confidence. They sip tea from simple clay mugs, and the air is filled with a warmth and family comfort that has been missing from this house for so long. "We're so lucky," Yvonne says quietly, warming her palms on the hot mug. "This sponsor, this person, I don't even know how to thank him." Alma nods, wiping the corner of her eye with the edge of her apron. "Yes, my dear, it's a real miracle, although, of course, miracles don't happen. He must be some very rich and generous person." It's at this point that Corey loses it. Her eyes light up, and she slams her mug down on the table. "That's not just anyone. That's Santa Claus." Yvonne and Alma exchange a slight smile. "Darling," Yvonne says tenderly, "Santa Claus doesn't exist. It's just a beautiful fairy tale." "No," Corey insists, her voice shaking with conviction. "I stood by the tree and asked him for help. I told him you were in the hospital, that we needed help. And he helped." She recounts that evening in detail, how she stood alone in the square, how she whispered her requests to the sparkling lights, how she felt utterly alone and despairing, and how, just a day later, the incredible happened. Treatment became free, and then her mother miraculously recovered. Yvonne and Alma listen tenderly, but a slight sadness can be seen in the grown women's gaze. They know that life works differently, that miracles are performed by people, not fairy tale characters. Alma says carefully, "Sometimes coincidences seem like miracles, but there's a logical explanation for everything." Corey looks at them defiantly. Her childish heart refuses to believe in such a boring reality. "I'll prove it to you. He exists. Let's go to the square and ask him for something. If he grants our wishes, then I'm right." Yvonne looks at her daughter with infinite tenderness. She's just returned from the hospital, still weak, but she sees how important it is for Corey to prove his case. "Okay," she agrees. "Let's go to the square." Alma sighs but nods too. They finish their cookies, put on their coats, and head outside, where the winter twilight is already setting in. The square is once again filled with people. The giant fir tree still sparkles with thousands of lights, creating a magical atmosphere. Corey sternly instructs the adults, "You have to speak out loud, otherwise he won't hear you." They find a relatively empty spot near the tree. "And I want a red bag full of sweets." Not far away, 2 men in dark clothes carefully record every word. As the family, satisfied and slightly embarrassed, turns to go home, one of the men raises a microphone to his lips. "Wishes granted. Grandma wants a fairy tale in the house. Mother wants to see the boss. The girl wants candy." In his office, Gene receives this information. His first sensation is tension. Revealing himself, it goes against every rule of his world. But then he looks at the photograph of Corey, taken by his people. It captures her beaming, faith-filled face when she learned of her mother's recovery. And he makes a decision. If they want proof, they'll get it. If they want a fairy tale, he'll create one. After all, isn't that what he's been doing all these past days? He issues a series of precise, well-thought-out orders. The first group immediately travels to the family's address. The second group searches for and purchases everything necessary. The third group provides cover and surveillance. Jin's people work with amazing efficiency. While the family leisurely returns home, their apartment is already bustling with activity. A team of professionals enters the apartment. One of them, a man with a serious face, inspects the premises. "We have 40 minutes maximum. Let's begin." They work like a well-oiled machine. One person is in charge of the garlands. He hangs them on the walls, windows, and doors. Not just haphazardly, but creating a coherent composition. The gold and silver threads shimmer in the lamplight, transforming the modest living room. Another specialist sets up the decorations. Artfully crafted snow globes, winter animal figurines, and sparkling glass snowflakes. Each item is positioned to create a sense of harmony and magic. A third person installs a professional audio system, carefully concealing the speakers. Soon the apartment is filled with the soft, melodic sounds of New Year's songs. Not loud and intrusive, but rather mood-setting. The kitchen table is transformed under the hands of the fourth person on the team. Fine china appears on it, though the family usually uses simple dishes. Winter flowers, white lilies and red roses, pop up in vases, even though it's the dead of winter outside. The aroma of freshly baked goods, croissants, cakes, and star-shaped and Christmas tree cookies, wafts from the baskets. The fifth person is busy with lighting. He replaces conventional lamps with warm, soft fixtures that create a sense of coziness and magic. In the corner of the living room, he installs a small but authentic fountain with illuminated water shimmering in it. Meanwhile, another team is working on the front door. They carefully remove the old, worn door and install a new one in its place, made of solid wood, with beautiful carvings and sturdy hardware. The door isn't just functional, it's beautiful. Its surface adorned with delicate carvings of winter patterns, and the handle gleams like polished silver. Next to the new door, they place a large red bag, just like the one you'd imagine Santa Claus carrying. The bag is tightly packed, containing not only candies and chocolates, but also exotic sweets from around the world, beautifully packaged fruits, and glazed nuts. Everything is chosen with the child's tastes in mind: bright, sweet, and festive. The person in charge of the operation inspects the results. The apartment is transformed beyond recognition. From a modest, slightly poor dwelling, it has become a fairy tale place, sparkling, cozy, filled with magic. But that's not all. "Time is running out," he says, looking at his watch. "Get your suit ready." Meanwhile, Gene is in his office receiving the final report. Everything is ready. He looks at the Santa Claus costume his people produced in just 20 minutes. Not a fancy dress costume, but a high-quality one, made of expensive materials, with a genuine white beard and kind, wise eyes on the mask. He slowly puts on the suit. It's a strange feeling. The powerful mafia boss, feared by thousands, now looks at his reflection as a fairy tale gift giver. But somehow, this image seems more appropriate to him now than his usual expensive suits. He's delivered to the family's home so discreetly that even his own security detail doesn't notice his arrival. The new, beautiful door seems unreal to them. They stare at the carved patterns, at the gleaming handle, unable to believe their eyes. Alma slowly, almost timidly, takes out the key. It enters the lock with a soft click. She takes a deep breath and pushes the door. What they see inside makes them freeze at the threshold. Their modest apartment is gone. In its place is a place straight out of the most beautiful winter fairy tale. Garlands shimmer with warm light, decorations sparkle. The air is filled with the aroma of flowers and freshly baked goods. Music creates an atmosphere of celebration and magic. Their gaze is drawn to the figure in the chair by the Christmas tree, Father Frost. A real one, as it seems to them at first glance. Dressed in an expensive, well-tailored suit, with a lush white beard, and with kind but penetrating eyes peering at them through a slit in his mask. Corey lets out a cry of delight. Yvonne and Alma are speechless. They slowly enter the apartment, their eyes in disbelief. They survey the transformed home, smell the aromas, hear the music. All their senses testify to the reality of what is happening, but their minds refuse to believe it. And then the figure in the chair stirs. Father Frost rises. His movement is smooth, majestic. He steps forward, and his voice, specially altered by a small device, sounds soft but authoritative. "You wanted to see me." He sees them frozen in the doorway, their eyes wide, their breath caught in their throats. 3 women, the girl, her mother, and her grandmother, stand rooted to the spot, unable to move. The magic they never believed in has materialized right before them, and now their brains refuse to process it. He slowly raises his hand in a calming gesture. His voice, still altered by the device but no longer theatrical, sounds soft and sincere. "Please don't be afraid. Calm down and listen to me. You wanted to know the truth. Now I'm ready to tell it." He gestures to the sofa, transformed by luxurious throws. "Have a seat. This won't take long." They mechanically comply with his request, still unable to utter a word. Corey clings to his mother, her eyes filled not with fear, but with burning curiosity. Yvonne hugs her daughter, her fingers convulsively digging into the fabric of her modest house dress. Alma sits up straight, her gaze intently studying the man in the suit, trying to discern what lies behind the mask. He begins his story, slowly, choosing his words carefully. It all started with an ordinary evening. I went out to the square. I needed a break from my daily routine. He omits the details of his real life. I was standing by the Christmas tree, looking at the lights, and then I saw you. His gaze turns to Corey. You were standing alone, crying. He describes that evening in detail, how the wind swirled snowflakes around the girl's lonely figure, how her shoulders shook with silent sobs, how she, lifting her head to the star on the top of the spruce, whispered her most intimate, most desperate words. I heard you asking for help for your mother. I heard you say you were afraid to visit her. I saw your tears. He pauses, letting his words sink in. He watches Yvonne clutch her daughter even tighter, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. This is the first time she's heard of her daughter's fear, of her loneliness that evening. I'm a man of action, he continues. And at that moment, I realized I couldn't just walk away. Your faith, your desperation, they touched something inside me. I decided that if Santa Claus didn't help, I would. He tells them everything, without going into illegal details, but also without hiding the extent of his capabilities. How he followed Corey to find out the address. How his people found out which hospital Yvonne was in. How he learned about their financial difficulties. The first thing I did was pay for the treatment, anonymously. I asked the doctors to say it was a gift from a sponsor. Alma makes a soft, broken sound as she remembers that call from the hospital, her disbelief, and then her overwhelming relief. Then you, he looks at Corey again, came to the tree again. Beneath them is the face of a mature, serious man. A face that bears traces of fatigue and responsibility. But there's an unusual softness in his eyes. I'm not a wizard. I'm not Santa Claus. I'm just a person who was in the right place at the right time, and who had the opportunity to help. Silence falls over the room. It lasts for a few seconds, which feels like an eternity. Corey is the first to recover. She breaks away from her mother and takes a step forward. Her expression doesn't express disappointment, but deep understanding. So, it wasn't him? She asks quietly. The man shakes his head. No, it was me. But then a smile blossoms on the girl's face. She turns to face her mother and grandmother. But Mom's healthy now, she exclaims. And our house has become so beautiful. And there are sweets. Everything I asked for has come true. Her childish logic is impeccable. It doesn't matter who granted her wishes, a fairy tale old man or a stranger. What matters is the outcome. What matters is that her mother is with her again, that she's smiling, that she's alive. Yvonne rises from the couch. Her eyes are filled with tears, but now they are tears of gratitude. She approaches the man and stops in front of him, unsure of what to say. Her voice breaks. I don't know how to thank you. You brought me back to my daughter. You saved our family. Alma joins her. The older woman looks at him with the penetrating understanding that comes with age. She sees in his eyes not only strength, but also pain and loneliness. You've taken on the role of guardian angel, she says quietly. Thank you. He stands before them, and for the first time in years, he feels awkward. Accustomed to fear and respect in the eyes of those around him, he now sees completely different emotions. Sincere, boundless gratitude. You don't need to thank me, he says, his own voice sounding strange to him. It was important for me to do this. Corey runs up to the red bag and peers inside. Her excited cry captures the tension of the moment. Look! There's so much here! She takes out a handful of brightly wrapped candies, her face beaming. At that moment, all the pathos and excitement give way to simple, childish joy. The man looks at them, the happy girl, the mother weeping with joy, the world-wise grandmother. He sees how his act, which began with a momentary impulse, has changed the lives of 3 people. And in that moment, he realizes he has received something more than just the satisfaction of a task accomplished. He gave the girl faith, Not in a fairy tale grandfather, but in the fact that there is goodness in the world. He brought her mother back to life. He gave her grandmother peace. Yvonne wipes away her tears and tries to smile. You must stay. Have tea with us. This is so little compared to what you've done. He hesitates. His world is one of shadows, negotiations, and danger. He doesn't belong in this cozy, bright world. But now, looking at their faces, he doesn't want to return to his reality. Not for long, he finally says. They sit down at a table laden with the exquisite treats his men brought. Corey fills the room with laughter as he samples the various sweets. Yvonne and Alma ask cautious questions, and he answers just as cautiously, not revealing too much about himself. He sits with them for only half an hour, but during that time, something profound happens in his soul. He, a mafia boss, is drinking tea dressed as Santa Claus with the family he saved, and this feeling, simply sitting at the table, listening to a child's laughter, seeing the gratitude in the adult's eyes, proves more powerful than any power or wealth. When he finally gets up to leave, Corey runs up to him and hugs him. "Thank you, Uncle," she whispers. "You are the best Santa Claus in the world." He pauses for a moment, then gently releases himself from her embrace and places his hand on her head. "Take care of your mother," he says quietly. As a parting gift, he leaves them not only a transformed house and a bag of sweets, he also leaves them a phone number they can call in case of any trouble, and a silent promise that from now on, their lives will be protected. The New Year's holidays were over, but a special atmosphere remained in their home, a mixture of newfound peace and quiet joy. Yvonne grew stronger with each passing day, returning to normal life. Corey began to smile and laugh for real again, not the forced way she had before. Alma looked at them and thanked fate for her unexpected salvation. But in their hearts, a feeling was brewing that they couldn't express in words, a deep, all-consuming gratitude for the man who had changed their lives. A simple thank you was woefully inadequate. Yvonne, Alma, and even Corey felt they had to do something important, something meaningful for him. Yvonne remembered that evening when he was sitting at their table. He was reserved, reticent, but in his eyes as he looked at Corey, she caught something elusive, a deep, hidden sadness. She remembered how he paused for a moment, looking at an old family photograph on the shelf, the one of her, little Corey, and Alma, laughing and hugging each other in the park. There was something hungry in his gaze. It was then that Yvonne realized their savior, this powerful and lonely man, was deprived of something most simple and most precious, ordinary human warmth, family. The idea came to her suddenly, and she shared it with her mother and daughter. Alma, always practical and skeptical, didn't object this time. She, too, saw that shadow of loneliness in his eyes, and Corey was absolutely delighted with the idea. "We can be his family, at least for a little while," she exclaimed. "But how do you surprise a man who seemingly has everything?" They didn't know his birthday, his hobbies, or anything, and then Yvonne decided to take a desperate step. She found a business card in her wallet, the one of her assistants had given her that day. It only had a phone number on it. She dialed the number and asked for a meeting. They answered curtly, but agreed. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a quiet cafe. The same assistant, a tall, unflappable man, spoke to her. Yvonne nervously explained her idea to him. She saw his initial wariness, but then, when she spoke not of a gift, but of a desire to give their savior a little home, his stern expression softened. "He doesn't allow himself much," the assistant said cautiously, looking down into his coffee cup. "He lives for his work, but there's one thing." He paused, as if weighing whether to speak. Yvonne looked at him pleadingly. He often looks at old photographs of one place, a small house by the lake where he used to visit as a child. He bought it long ago, restored it, but he never goes there. He says there's no point. The assistant said nothing more, but Yvonne understood. This was the key. That same evening, the three of them began to hatch a plan. It wouldn't be an expensive gift. It would be a gift from the heart. They decided their mission wasn't simply to take him to that house, but to create there, for just one day, the atmosphere of a real home, the one he'd been deprived of all these years. Corey wrote him a letter, naive, touching, full of childish sincerity. She invited him to spend a day with them on a picnic. They carefully planned the menu, simple but delicious home-cooked food. A pie made according to Alma's recipe, roast meat, and pickles they'd picked the previous summer. Ivan baked his favorite cookies, the very ones he'd tried at their house, and couldn't help but praise. They contacted the assistant, and after a brief silence, he agreed to help. He provided them with the address and keys, with only one warning: don't tell him you know about his past. Just say you want to thank him. Day dawned. The weather was spring-like mild, the snow was melting, and the sun was shining in a special way, heralding the coming of spring. The assistant announced that the boss would be at the lake house at noon on business, ostensibly to check on the property. When his black car pulled up to the gate of an old but well-kept house overlooking a frozen lake, he didn't expect to see familiar faces. Ivan, Alma, and Corey stood at the entrance. They didn't shout surprise. They simply stood there, smiling, holding baskets of food and a blanket. He froze, his hand frozen on the doorknob. A look of confusion, even mild alarm, crossed his usually impassive face. "We invited ourselves over," Ivan said, her voice shaking with excitement. "For a picnic." It was spotlessly clean, the furniture expensive, but there wasn't a single personal item, not a single knick-knack that would indicate someone lived there. It was a museum, not a home. But they quickly changed that. Alma lit the fireplace, and the room filled with warmth and the crackling sound of the logs. Ivan began setting the dining room table, taking home-cooked treats out of baskets. Meanwhile, Corey spread a blanket right in front of the fireplace and set up a headquarters there with the board games they'd brought. At first, he was reserved, watching them from the sidelines, like an outsider. But gradually, the atmosphere they created began to melt his icy armor. The smell of home-cooked food, the sounds of their laughter, the warmth of the fireplace. It was all so simple, so familiar, and yet so unattainable for him all these years. They didn't force him to talk, didn't ask unnecessary questions. They simply allowed him to be part of their little world. They ate together, laughed at Alma's stories, and played a simple board game with Corey. Ivan sat quietly next to him and watched as the tension gradually left his shoulders. His face softened, and the crinkles of his eyes appeared in the corners, not from sternness, but from a smile. As the day drew to a close and they began to pack, he stood by the fireplace and looked at them. There was more than just gratitude in his eyes. There was something deeper, understanding. "Thank you," he said, and it was the only word he said all day. But it said everything. They drove away, leaving him in a house that now smelled not of dust and loneliness, but of pie, pine, and happiness. They didn't know if he'd ever return, but they knew that today they'd given him more than just a day. They'd given him a memory of what it was like to be not a boss, not a benefactor, but simply a person, part of a family. And he, left alone in the quiet of the house, went to the window and looked out at the darkening lake. The coals were still smoldering in the fireplace, an empty pie plate sat on the table, and Corey's forgotten colorful hair tie lay on the sofa. And for the first time in many, many years, his house wasn't empty. He sat alone in the silence of the lake house. The scent of their pie still lingered in the air, and Corey's colorful eraser lay forgotten on the couch. He picked it up, and something within him shifted. The same icy wall that had protected his heart for years cracked. They gave him more than just a day. They gave him a feeling he hadn't known in decades, a sense of belonging, and he realized they were all incomplete. He was a lone wolf in a world where trust was worth more than any contract. They were a family, surviving in a world where one misfortune could destroy everything. Each of them had their own unhealed wound. The decision came quickly, as it always did when he realized he had to act. But this time, it wasn't a business decision. It was something much deeper. 2 days later, his car pulled up to their house again. This time, Corey opened the door. Seeing him, she beamed and called out, "Mom! Grandma! Uncle's here!" They gathered in the kitchen at the very table where it all began. He sat across from them, his fingers slowly swirling the mug of tea Alma had poured for him. "I was thinking about what you did for me," he began, his voice unusually quiet. "You showed me something important." He looked at each of them in turn, at Yvonne with her tired but kind eyes, at Alma with her wise, penetrating gaze, at Corey with her boundless faith in the good. "We all have a hole in our lives," he said bluntly. "You've lost your footing. I've lost my purpose. I built an empire, but my home was always empty." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "This was more difficult than any negotiation process. You offered me a family for a day, and I want to offer you to become a real family." Silence hung in the air. Yvonne and Alma exchanged confused glances. "I'm not talking about money," he added hastily, seeing their confusion. "Money is just paper. I'm talking about something else. You're struggling alone. I live alone. We can stop this." He glanced around their modest but cozy kitchen. "You have something I don't have, warmth, real life, and I have the power to protect that warmth, forever." Corey was the first to get the point. Her eyes lit up. "So you're going to be our dad?" His stern face softened. "No, homie, I can't replace your dad, but I can be the one who has your back. Always." He turned to Yvonne and Alma. "Your troubles are over. All debts are cleared. Yvonne, if you want to study or start your own business, it's all arranged. Alma, you can finally rest. And you," he looked at Corey, "will be just a child, without fears, without worries." He spoke not as a benefactor, but as someone offering partnership, as an equal. "And in exchange, his voice wavered. "In exchange, you'll let me come to your pie sometimes, listen to your stories, be part of it." He pointed at the walls, at the table, at their faces. "Part of your home." Yvonne looked at him, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Alma reached out and covered his hand with hers, the old scarred hand that held the mug. "We have nothing to give you in return," Alma said quietly. "Only ourselves." He shook his head. "That's all I need." Thus their silent agreement was made, not on paper, not in the form of a contract, in the form of glances, handshakes, and silent tears. The next day, his people sprang into action. The family's debts were miraculously cleared. Yvonne received an offer to take free accounting courses, the profession she'd always dreamed of but couldn't afford. Alma was found a good doctor to treat her back pain, but most importantly, he started showing up at their house. At first, once a week, then more often. He'd come unannounced, always bearing small gifts. Not expensive, but meaningful. A book for Corey. A warm blanket for Alma. Flower seeds for Yvonne. They taught him simple things. Baking cookies, doing crossword puzzles, laughing for no reason. He taught them not to fear the future. One evening, sitting on their couch, he watched Corey do her homework, Yvonne read a book, and Alma knit socks. And he realized that for the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel the weight of loneliness. He had found neither subordinates nor business partners. He had found a haven. But they found neither a patron nor a sponsor. They found a man who made their world safe. And in this exchange, they all became whole. He was still a mafia boss to the outside world. But to them, he was simply Gene. A man who had come in from the cold and finally found a home. Several months passed. Their strange new coexistence gradually ceased to be an arrangement and became a rhythm of life. Gene came to dinner every 2 or 3 days. He attended Corey's birthday party, helped Alma choose new glasses, and consulted with Yvonne about the color of the wallpaper in the hallway. He became part of the landscape of their lives. But one evening, after their usual dinner, when Corey had gone off to do her homework and Alma was dozing in the armchair in front of the TV, Gene remained in the kitchen with Yvonne. They washed the dishes together, as they often did. But this time, the silence between them was different, tense and meaningful. He dried his hands on a towel and turned to face her. "Yvonne, here in this house, for the first time in years, I no longer feel lonely." She put the last plate in the cupboard and turned, catching the seriousness in his voice. "I know, Gene. For us, too, it was a salvation." He took a small step forward. "I'm tired of being a guest. I'm tired of leaving. I want to wake up and fall asleep in a place that smells like your pie, where I can hear Corey's laughter, and where Alma grumbles about the news on TV." Yvonne looked at him, holding her breath. She was afraid to understand where he was leading. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. He pulled out of his pocket not a ring box, but a simple key. He placed it on the table between them. "I bought a house, not the one by the lake. A new one, bigger than this. With a garden for Corey, a studio for you, a sun porch for Alma. It's in a quiet neighborhood, not far from here." He looked her straight in the eyes. "Move in, with me. Let's be one family, not just soulmates, but under one roof. A real family!" Yvonne was silent, her mind trying to comprehend the enormity of the proposal. This was more than marriage. This was an offer to become one. "Are you asking us, to create a home?" she finally breathed. "I'm asking you to let me build it for you, and for myself. I won't make empty promises, but I swear that every morning I will do everything to keep you safe and happy." Alma appeared in the doorway. She hadn't been asleep. She'd heard everything. Her wise gaze moved from her daughter's face to Jean's. "Jean," she said firmly, "you're already part of our family. But home, this is serious. It's forever." "Forever is the only thing that suits me," he answered without hesitation. Corey ran from room to room, choosing the largest one for herself, but ultimately asked for the room next to the one occupied by Jean and Yvonne. They didn't register their marriage. For them, it was a formality. Their marriage was consummated the moment Jean first entered their lives, and they entered his heart. His office was now at home. He often worked late, but now he could hear Yvonne humming through the wall as she put Corey to bed. He could smell the coffee Alma brewed for him in the morning. His world, once a world of shadows, negotiations, and danger, now had a solid, unshakable center. One evening, Yvonne found him in his office. He was looking out the window at the garden, where Corey was playing with the dog he'd given her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, hugging him from behind. He put his hand on her. "I think about how I've been searching for strength and power all my life, but I found true wealth here, in this house. With you." She smiled and pressed her cheek against his back. "This is your true empire, Jean, and we will never give it up." They stood there, silent, watching their daughter play in the garden of their shared home. The story that began with the tears of a lonely girl by the Christmas tree found its conclusion here. In the quiet family happiness they had built together. Almost 2 years had passed since they had begun living under the same roof. One evening, Jean was sitting in his office, reviewing paperwork. The door opened slightly, and Corey's face appeared in the crack. She was already 11, and her eyes shone with determination. "May I?" she asked quietly. He put the papers down and nodded. "You can always—" Corey walked up to his desk and paused, shifting from foot to foot, clearly preparing to say something important. "I want to ask you something," she began, looking down at her socks. "But I have to be honest." "I'm always honest with you," Jin replied, and it was true. With them, he was freed from the need to lie. Corey took a deep breath and looked up at him. "Can I call you Dad?" The air in the office froze. Jean looked at her, and his usually imperturbable face expressed a whole range of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then a warm, deep wave of tenderness. He saw in her eyes not childish whim, but a conscious, well-considered decision. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "You had a biological father." "He left and never came back," Corey said simply. "But you stayed! You took me to school when I was sick. You listened to me learn poetry. You're here." He stood up from the table and dropped to one knee in front of her so that he was on the same level with her. "Then, yes." His voice trembled slightly. "I'll be very proud if you call me Dad." A smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire room blossomed on Corey's face. She threw herself into his arms, and he, still kneeling, hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered into his shoulder. At that moment, Yvonne's office door was slightly open. She heard their conversation, and tears streamed down her face, but she wiped them away with a smile. Later, after Corey had gone to bed, Jean and Yvonne were sitting in the kitchen. "Did you hear?" Yvonne asked quietly. He nodded. "This is the greatest gift of my life." "And that's not all," Yvonne smiled. "She has one more wish. She shared it with me before bed this evening." What? Jin asked, looking at her curiously. Yvonne took his hand in hers. She asked for a sister. He froze. This offer was more grandiose than any business contract, more dangerous than any deal, to create a new life, to give Corey not a toy, but a soulmate, to continue their family, giving it a new beginning. She said she wanted a sister she could share secrets with, so she could call you Dad, too. Jin stared silently at their intertwined hands. He thought of his lonely childhood, the years when he couldn't trust anyone, the emptiness he'd carried inside himself before them. And he saw the future, a noisy home filled with children's laughter, 2 daughters who would grow up in love and safety, whom he could protect from all the storms of this world. He looked up at Yvonne, and his gaze held everything: hope, fear, and boundless love. "And you?" he asked quietly. "Do you want this?" "I want our family, Jean." And the next morning, when Corey ran downstairs for breakfast, the first thing she said, looking at Jean, was, "Good morning, Dad." And in this simple word lay the whole meaning of his new, real life. 9 months passed. 9 months of hope, anxious anticipation, and preparation. The home, accustomed to the rhythm of life with one girl, was preparing to welcome another child. Labor began during the night. Oddly enough, Corey woke up just as Yvonne woke Jean with a soft moan. She sat on her bed, her heart pounding, but her soul at peace. She knew her wish was being granted. Jean, usually perfectly composed, had lost all composure that night. He helped Yvonne dress, his fingers shaky and his voice breaking. Alma, already dressed and with her bag packed, looked at him with a knowing smile. "Everything will be all right, son," she said, calling him that for the first time. And that simple word gave him strength. The hours in the hospital dragged on painfully slowly. Jean held Ivani's hand, whispering words of encouragement to her, wiping the sweat from his brow. Alma sat in the hallway, fingering an old photograph of herself as a young mother holding Yvonne. Corey dozed, her head in her grandmother's lap, but woke at the slightest rustle. And so, early in the morning, when the first rays of the sun painted the sky in delicate peach tones, a piercing, pure cry cut through the air. The doctor came out to them, removing his mask. A smile lit up his tired face. "Congratulations! It's a girl!" Corey jumped up, her eyes shining. "I asked you to! I knew it!" Yvonne, exhausted but radiant, lay on the bed, a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket on her chest. Jean stood nearby, speechless, simply staring at them, a single, yet utterly sincere tear rolling down his cheek. Corey tiptoed closer. "May I?" she whispered. Yvonne nodded. "Meet your sister." The girl peered into the blanket and gasped. A tiny face, a wrinkled nose, tiny fingers, and 2 huge, clear eyes, looking out at the world with curiosity. "She's looking at me," Corey whispered reverently. Then she gently touched the tiny hand. "Hello, little sister. I'm Corey. I'll protect you. Always." Alma, standing in the doorway, wiped away tears with the corner of her handkerchief. She looked at this picture, at her daughter, her son-in-law, her 2 granddaughters, and felt the circle close. Their family, which had been through so many trials, was now complete, more than complete. "What should we call it?" Yvonne asked quietly, looking at Jean. He looked at Corey. "You choose. This is your dream." Corey thought seriously, not taking her eyes off the baby. "Alina," she finally said. "It means bright, because she came and lit everything up even brighter." Thus, Alina became the new sunshine in their family. When they were discharged, the house greeted them not just with comfort, but with a real celebration. Jean's family, who over the years had become almost part of the extended family, decorated everything with garlands and balloons. On the table stood a huge cake with the inscription, "Happy Birthday, Alina." Life in the house changed. It filled with new sounds, gentle whimpers, the lullabies Yvonne sang while rocking her daughter, and the laughter of Corey, who would sit for hours next to the crib and talk to her sister. Jean discovered new sides to himself. This formidable man, the dreaded figure of his business rivals, could spend hours rocking his youngest daughter in his arms, making funny faces at her and cooing softly in a voice that was completely alien to him. His office was now adorned not only with business documents, but also with Corey's childhood drawings and Alina's first ultrasound photo. One evening, when Alina had already fallen asleep and Corey was doing her homework, Yvonne and Jean were sitting in the living room. "Do you most remember that day when Corey stood by the tree and cried?" Yvonne asked quietly. He nodded, looking at the fire in the fireplace. "Like it was yesterday." Who would have thought that her tears would lead us to this? She gestured towards the quiet house filled with family happiness. "She asked for a miracle," Jean said, "and we created it. Together." Their story, which began with a lonely girl's desperate gesture, has evolved into a hymn to family, born not by blood, but by choice. And now, with Alina's birth, this family has found a new, brighter continuation, in the form of two sisters, one of whom made a wish, and the other became its most beautiful fulfillment.